Okay, you should be good.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, live from Perry, New York. This is Saturday Night Live, and I'm your host, Jeremy, of the Lore Program. So today's topic is about Odin. Previously, we had scheduled it for Egil's Saga, but our lore provost, Tom, has laryngitis. So this is an impromptu session. This lecture, which was originally delivered to my kindred in November of last year, I merely spruced it up and turned it into a PowerPoint. So thank you for joining us. I hope you learned something. And with that said, let's get to it. All right, 1 second here. Let's see, that's not what I want. All right, can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation? All right. All right, so a one-eyed look at the All-Father. Odin's a very popular god in modern heathenry, a certainly important god in historical heathenry. He happens to be my patron. So without further ado, let's take a look. All right, the objective of this presentation is a broad overview of the All-Father through history, from ancient times through the modern era. Its purpose is to give a balanced view of Odin, and its purpose is to convey information that you can't find in every As a True 101 book. So every As a True 101 book says, Odin sits in the high sea, he's got 2 ravens, he's got 2 wolves, he leads the Iron Harrier, things of that nature. I'm sure anyone who's been in heathenry for more than 6 months already has that knowledge. We're going to look at something a little deeper and a little broader and not get too much into those basic details, okay? All right, so it's structured as such. First, we're going to look at the lore references, to Odin, this being, sponsored by the lore program. We're going to hit the highlights of Odin in the lore so that we know where the information comes from. There's a lot of hidden authors that will go on about Odin without, necessarily detailing where they get their information. And I urge everyone to be a little careful about that. Always check people's sources. So from there, we move on to characteristics of Odin as gleaned, as aggregated from that lore. Then we look at his evolution of his cult in historical times from the primordial beginnings through the late Viking Age. From there, we go to Odin in post-heathen times into the medieval era and the right before the modern era. And then we discuss Odin in modern times. And we, at this point, I would encourage people to give their unverified personal gnosis, their personal opinions and experiences at that point. Now, disclosure. While the historical evidence presented in this lecture is completely objective, gleaned from sources, be advised the presenter, me, is oathbound to the deity under consideration, and therefore anything I say as far as UPG, anything I say as far as modern experience is necessarily biased, okay? So just keep that into consideration. All right, before I proceed, any questions or comments at this point? Okay. All right, so let's start with the lore discussion, the poetic Edda. In the Velaspa, Odin, the beginning poem that narrates the events of the cosmos through creation to Ragnarok and post-Ragnarok, Odin it acts as a necromancer. He calls forth the seeress. That whole story begins with Odin acting as a magician to call forth the dead seeress. Havamal, the sayings of the High One, is a wisdom document attributed to Odin. It's composed of at least 5 sections redacted together. The last 2 sections concern Odin directly, his winning of the runes by hanging on the world tree, and the list of 18 runic spells that he gleaned from the runes. And please forgive my Norse pronunciation. I didn't take Old Norse, but in the lay of Valruthnir, Odin dons a disguise to enter a giant's hall, Valruth, and he engages in a battle of wits with the giant and ends up winning. They engage in a riddle contest, and Odin wins only because Only he knows what Balder whispered into Odin's ear. In the Lay of Grimnir, Frigga instigates Odin to visit a king who was under Odin's patronage, but who grew inhospitable. So Odin checks it out to see what this king is like. He disguises himself as a sorceress. He is caught and tortured between two fires for 8 nights. While tortured, he goes into the spiel that reveals mythological truths about the cosmos. The king eventually realizes it's Odin and tries to free him from captivity, but he falls on his sword. Odin basically kills him indirectly. In the Lay of Harbuth, Odin disguises Ferryman and taunts Thor. Now, this gets amusing, but as far as the social context, it's Odin representing the cult of the aristocrats versus Thor representing the cult of the common people. There's necessarily a certain hostility between the two. So Odin is the god of nobles and kings and aristocrats and heroes, and they look down their long snooty noses at the common people, and the common people in turn take umbrage at it. In the Flighting of Loki, Loki excoriates all the gods. His charges all have at least some basis in truth. Loki accuses Odin of unmanly esoteric practices involving Satyr, and he accuses him of unfairly manipulating the luck of his heroes in battle. You know, he's capricious. He gives luck to some, and then he withdraws it. They all die. Those that he favors usually end up to their deaths. Not a pleasant god to serve. And then in Baldur's Dream, Odin again acts as a necromancer and invokes Osiris, and it's basically a repeat of the Voluspa. Okay, so that's the Poetic Edda. Any questions or concerns at this point? Comments? Moving on to the Prose Edda. All right, so Snorri famously humorizes Odin as a prophet that leads his people from Troy. The main section of the Prose Edda, the deluding of Gifli, Odin figures prominently. He's the creator, he's the demiurge that creates the world. He sets in many motions. Of course, he has his part in Ragnarok, where he leads the Einherjar and dies in battle. And then in the section of Skaldskaparmal, Odin wins the meed of poetry from the giants. In Heimskringla, we look at the Ynglinga saga first. Again, written by Snorri, Odin is humorized into a human. He and the gods are master magicians who are worshipped as gods because of their magic, and it is Odin who begins the custom of sacrifice. He introduces sacrifice to the gods. Now, speaking of sacrifice, there's an interesting story for those of you who haven't read it. Odin is the wish giver, right? He can grant wishes. King On sacrifices 9 of 10 children in exchange to Odin for prolonged life. So the king says, give me more life, and Odin bargains with him. Okay, give me this child, I'll give you 70 years. Give me this child, I'll give you 60 years. So Odin prolongs his life, but the king, in his foolishness, does not ask for youth to go along with the prolonged life. He becomes decrepit. They have to, his people have to feed him liquid through a horn, and eventually they dispose of him before he can kill his last child. So the moral of the story is, be careful what you wish for, or if you ask Odin of something, be sure to ask fully, be sure to ask thoughtfully, be sure to ask considerately. Because he'll give you what you want and nothing more, and he'll give you enough rope to hang yourself. There's another story there that King Olaf is killed. He is a king that hasn't made his sacrifices. The crops are bad. People blame him. They offer him up to Odin as a human sacrifice, an expiatory sacrifice for bad harvests. All right, moving on with the Heimskringla. History of Olaf the Traitor. Håkon the Jarl is formally baptized as a Christian. However, when he needs luck in battle, guess who he goes to? He goes to Odin. He makes a blood offering. The presence of ravens signifies that the offering was accepted. Again, Odin is the god of sacrifice. As far as King Olaf himself, he starts burning many wizards and magic users in the name of Christianity. He gets the attention of the god of magic. Odin visits him one night as a one-eyed stranger, has a conversation with him, tries to get the cooks to feed him poisoned meat, but his ruse is discovered. Odin vacates, the meat is buried, ruse backfires. Unfortunately, in my opinion, because King Olaf would have been better dead. All right. Any questions or comments so far before we proceed?
I came in late. This is James. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, so we're doing an Odin presentation in lieu of Eagle's Saga. It was a last-minute change, okay? Just so you know. And we are recording, so when it's posted to YouTube, you can go back and catch the first few minutes. All right, now the Danish histories. If you have the, I wouldn't say privilege, if you have the misfortune of reading Saxo Grammaticus, who is as boring as all hell, you will see lore that you don't see anywhere else, okay? So, in book 1, Odin is, again, humorized as a magician. Now, he has a gold statue erected in his honor. He has his devotees. They pay respects to him at this gold statue. It's his privilege. His wife, Frigga, wants to outdo him. She builds a grander gold statue. She gets more devotees to perform more honors to outdo him. Odin gets jealous. He has her devotees hanged in response. Her response is to pay him back with adultery. She cheats on him. And then the scandal causes him great misfortune, and he goes into voluntary exile for a while the political scandal dies down. So, sounds like something out of the White House in the last couple of 20 or 30 years, right? Now, book 3 is very contentious here. There's a completely different story about Balder. Balder is killed. Balder happens to be a warlord, not a god. He's not a very sympathetic protagonist in the story. But in any case, Balder is killed. There's a prophecy that Odin must have a son with a princess in order to avenge his death. The princess doesn't want anything to do with him. Odin disguises himself as a soldier, a blacksmith, another soldier. He tries to impress her. She doesn't have any of it. Finally, he disguises himself as a nurse, a female nurse. When she gets sick, he takes advantage of her. The child is born, but in disgust, the gods banish him for 10 years out of the rape issue. And there are those who do not like Odin and who will point to this story and say Odin is a rapist. But again, this is one story from one source of lore that doesn't exist anywhere. It was written by a hostile Christian. Who knows how much validity is attached to it. All right. In the various sagas, and I know the sagas aren't very popular. I had to slug through them myself. A lot of them are pretty boring. But the gods are rarely involved directly. However, the heroes of the sagas, like Egil Skallagrimsson, clearly have an Odinic connection. They recite poetry. They do runic magic. They're into battle. Now, what's interesting is that the antagonists are usually berserkers. Berserkers were shape-shifting warriors of an Odinic cult. By the time of the sagas, they become fiends. They prey on people. They rob. They rape. They challenge you to a duel. This is how they survive. The protagonists usually get their street credentials by killing the berserkers in a duel. So it's one Odinic protagonist against Odinic antagonists. It's kind of interesting. Gautric's saga is interesting. So there's this hero named Gautric, and but actually he was the king. There's a warrior named Starkov. He's the real main character. Odin is judging his life. Odin gives him blessings. For every blessing, Thor gives a counter curse, like you will live 3 lifetimes. And then Thor says, but you'll do a great misdeed in every lifetime. And then Odin says, you will composed great poetry. And Thor says, you will not remember this poetry. And then Odin says, you'll be beloved of the aristocrats and the heroes and the warriors. And Thor says, you'll be despised by the common people. So interpret that how you want, but we can see it as, again, a hostility between the upper classes and the lower classes, the aristocracy, the peasants, is implied by the cult of Odin and cult of Thor. And the more interesting thing is that when Starkuth arranges a mock sacrifice of a king to Odin, like, you know, the winds aren't blowing, we need to kill somebody, we need to kill the king in order to get the winds going so that the ships can sail. They want to do a mock sacrifice of the king rather than to actually kill him. But Odin is a god who wants his due. So when they try to kill him with the reed, which is a stand-in for the spear, it turns into a real spear. The king dies as a sacrifice. You can't cheat Odin. Any comments or concerns so far before we proceed? All right, the saga of the Volsungs, which is one of the more interesting sagas. Odin oversees the rise and fall of various generations of the Volsung clan. He fetches them magical items to aid them. He oversees their development. And then usually he withdraws his favor at the end, and they die and presumably go to Valhalla, back to Einherjar. Also, one of the central characters is a Valkyrie called Brunhilde. Odin curses her with a sleep thorn for favoring the wrong king in battle. So Odin is very much in the background of events, setting things up. Excuse me. And finally, my favorite saga, the saga of King Hrothkraki. There's a farmer named Hrothgar. He encounters the king and his champions and tests them for 3 nights with cold and then thirst and fire. He makes sure that they are worthy to go on to the final battle. However, the farmer offers the king and his champions weapons, magic weapons. Now they look old, they look ancient, they look decrepit, and the king and his champions turn them down. And then Hrothgar disappears in a huff. He's offended. Later at the last battle, the king and most of his champions die. And it is strongly implied that had they accepted Odin's weapons, they would have prevailed, they would have survived. So it's not a very nice thing to turn down an Odinic gift. All right, just to go a little bit more lore, in Germania, Tacitus claims that a god whom he identified with Mercury, Wodenus, received human sacrifice. And, you know, archaeology does point to human sacrifice in the bogs and such in ancient Germania. In the Anglo-Saxon royal genealogies, Woden is the ancestor of 7 of 8 of the royal houses. The 8th is Saxonot, whoever Saxonot may be. In the 9 Herbs charm and in the 2nd Merseburg charm, Woden is mentioned as a god of healing. Some people aren't aware that he has a healing side, but it's part of his repertoire of magic. Woden id est Fur, Woden is fury, referring to his battle fury. And in various folklore sources, he is the leader of the wild hunt. Now, sometimes the wild hunt's led by a female, Berchtesgaden in southern Germany. In parts of England, the wild hunt can be led by, you know, King Arthur, Sir Francis Drake, what have you. But in most places of Europe, the wild hunt, the procession of the spectral dead at Christmas time, is led by a male supernatural figure who's identified with Odin. All right. Now, before we go any further to the characteristics of Odin, does anyone have any comments or questions on that, or want to bring into anything else? All right. So, based on that little lore lecture I just gave you, which hopefully didn't bore you to death, what can we say about Odin? What can we glean about Odin's character, about his provinces, his spiritual provinces? Well, he has more poetic bynames, or hete, than any other deity. Edward Thorson, one of his books, counts 103. So the god of magic and poetry, the poets invested him with all these different bynames, all these different alternative names. He's a god of magic, runes, Galdr, and Sith. He's a god of wot, or inspiration, and thus of poets. He won, or should we say stole, the meat of poetry. He's a master of disguises. He always assumes a different facade and identity. He rarely appears to people as himself. He wants to fool you and trick you. He appears to giants in disguise and tests their mettle. He's always testing his wits against others. He's willing to go into a hall of a giant and put his life on the line to test his wits with that giant. He's about sacrifice and ordeal for the sake of gaining knowledge and power. He's not like Tyr, who sacrifices a hand for the good of the community. He sacrifices his eye. He sacrifices 9 nights on a tree for his own power and knowledge. Now, in the surviving lore, he is the god most likely to interact with other people. So he offers challenges, he tests people, he issues favors and patronage, but he can withdraw that favor and patronage at any time. To take a gift from Odin can be dangerous. Okay, so in the Volsung Saga, Odin appears at like a feast and sticks a sword into a tree growing in a hole and says, if you can have this sword, you're worthy of it. And so the hero, Sigurd or Sigmund, or one of the six in that saga, pulls the sword out like King Arthur. And it's his sword. Later, the sword shatters when Odin withdraws his favor. So taking a gift can be dangerous, but to refuse a gift can be even more dangerous, as when the farmers encountered the farmer Karani. They refused to take his weapons because they looked decrepit, but lo and behold, those were magic weapons that could have helped them in the last battle against the evil elf sorceress. So. He is, as we said, a god of royalty, aristocracy, and heroes. He's not a god for the common farmer. He's a god for wanderers. The Havamal was written by, presumably written by wanderers, as we'll talk about later. And he's a god intimately connected with the dead. He's a necromancer. He bids corpses rise from the grave and speak. He leads the Wild Hunt, which is the spectral dead at Yule time. He leads the Einherjar at Ragnarok. He hung on the royal tree for 9 nights, which was in some sense a death ritual to gain the runes from the world of the dead. He's called a god of war, but he rarely appears in combat. He appears in combat at Ragnarok, and he promptly dies. Perhaps it's fair to say he's a god of magic and death that presides over those aspects of battle. Finally, he's a god of sacrifice. He begat the world as a sacrifice. He killed Ymir and split up his parts. He instituted sacrifice as a religious rite for the gods. He is the god most demanding of his share of sacrifice. He's a god who sacrificed himself and parts of himself for knowledge. And he's a god to whom human sacrifice was practiced. Where the Volknut appears in archaeology, it's always on like a scene of sacrifice. Okay, so I put the unicursal and the tricursal Volknuts here just to emphasize that it connotes his aspect as a god of sacrifice. And if anyone cares, I've got one on my shoulder as a devotion to Odin in that aspect. All right, so before we continue, does anyone have any comments, concerns, suggestions, or on those characteristics of Odin?
I have a question. You indicated that Odin is rarely seen in battle. However, if he's a master disguise, it could be said he's in battle but was not recognized.
That's true. That's true. There's a story in Saxo Grammaticus where Odin appears as the charioteer, the chariot driver of one of the heroes. So he's driving the hero around. At the end, he actually clubs the hero to death. But I mean, your larger point that maybe we don't see him in battle because of his disguise, that could be valid. but the surviving corpus doesn't allude to that very much. And granted, not much of the lore has survived, not as much as we like. So it could go either way as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you for comment. Anyone else? All right, well, moving on. I would like to discuss an outline of his cult, okay? So now we know what the god is, how did he come here? How did he develop? I'm sure most of you know, if you've read anything about Odin, you know that based on comparative Indo-European philology as presented by Dumazel and others, because because his root word is synonymous with God, he's cognate to Jupiter and Zeus. They're all descended from the Indo-European shining sky father. It's presumed that Tyr or Tiwaz was the original chief deity. At some point, he was usurped in that position by Woden, who was Woden being the Germanic name, the continental Germanic name. It's presumed that happened sometime in the migration area with the rise of the war bands. And that's just a theory. I have, I don't claim to be the most well-read person in heathenry, but I have yet to read definitive proof. That's just a theory coming from Indo-European philology. In any case, if we accept that as a truth, if we accept that...
Jeremy?
Yes.
What is it that you're taking exception to? The theory that he was replaced by Woden, or the theory that Tyr was the chief Teutonic deity?
Well, the theory that Tyr was the original chief deity. Like I said, I'm not sure if there's any credible evidence, incontrovertible evidence that that's the case. That's a theory based on linguistic connections of Tyr to these other sky deities who happen to be chief deities in their pantheon. So, like I said, it's a prevailing theory. It's a nice theory, but does anyone have any literary references? Does anyone have any archaeological facts proving that Tyr was the original chief deity? I don't believe so, not in my experience. In any case, if we accept this theory, let's just take it as a given that Tyr was, or Tiwaz, as he was known then, it was the chief sky god at the time, the chief pantheon god. How did Woden get started? How did he become important? There's a theory that Odin is a Germanic reworking of the Celtic Lug. And Luke is this deity of all skills, warrior, smith, poet, you name it. He squints his one eye when he's ready to use his magic, so he's one-eyed some of the time. When the Romans took over Gaul, they instituted a cult of Mercury Luke. So there was this syncretic cult of Mercury Luke that must have been known to German soldiers. Okay. And in any case, the Germans and the Celts were in close contact in the Rhineland. Philip Shaw, who's a distinguished scholar, says that the first appearance of Woden is along the Rhine with the Lombards and Alemanni tribes. And then if you read something called Lady with the Mead Cup by Enright, which I encourage everyone to read, he takes this further. He says that the figure of Odin, the visage of Odin, was forged sometime in those early days of somewhere around the 1st century, let's say, and he was inspired by historical humans. His one-eyedness was inspired by various one-eyed warlords who passed into histories and legends, like Julius Civilis, who led the Batavian rebellion against Rome. So apparently, in his view, Odin is a Germanic reworking of the Celtic Lug with some of this historical personas mixed in. Now, whether you agree with that or not, and I don't know how well to take that. It's a theory that's worth reading. Okay. There's another theory that in various Indo-European societies, adolescent male warriors were taken from their families, brought to special cults, which exist on these social and physical fringes of society. So, you know, in Sparta, when you were 7 years old, they took the son away and they trained him in the art of fighting, okay? It was kind of like this, only it was a religious thing throughout the Indo-European world. There were wolf cults and so forth. The Germanic version of this was called the Männerbunde. Adolescent warriors practiced ecstatic rituals involving dance, intoxication, using masks. They whipped themselves into a frenzy to shift their consciousness. They identified with the dead, because if you identify with the dead, you're invincible like the dead. You can't kill the dead. Woden was theoretically the patron of these ecstatic adolescent warriors. And this was seen to presage the later Berserker warriors who did more or less the same thing. Kershaw, the One-Eyed God, that's you can read that book. It's a brilliant book. Just be aware that that theory is disputed by some people. Now, the war bands of the Iron Age drew men from across familial bonds. Okay, so there was nothing more important in Germanic society than family, than kin. You were not an individual. You were a member of the kin. You owed loyalty to your kin. Frith was possible only within the kin structure. But as the warlords drew people together to fight the Romans, to seize wealth from the Roman lands, they had to find a way to unite these people from these different tribes and these different families. So the scholar Enright says this is how Sambal developed. These were involved drinking rituals where the warlord was the father, the warlord's lady was the mother, the lady served mead, and she presided over the hierarchy. If she gave you the cup first, you were the chief warrior, and so forth. In any case, the Sambal forged a fictive kinship. In other words, we drink together, we boast and toast the gods together, we toast each other. The warlord's our father. We're a new family. And Woden presided over this new family, this new warlord family. Okay. And all this feasting, all this toasting within this warlike structure may have contributed to poetic conceptions about Valhalla, for instance. Is Valhalla an actual spiritual place, or is it just a later poetic echo of a time when warlords gathered and their so-called family gathered to toast each other under these drinking rituals? But these early Iron Age cults no doubt paid fealty to Woden. Okay. There are ritual masks in the Anglo-Saxon tradition that are missing a garnet, like a little gem filter from one of the eyes, the left eye. And it's presumed that the warriors may have worn such masks as a tribute to Odin, or maybe they used it to ecstatically dance and shift their personalities, like the berserkers. Okay. Any questions so far before I proceed? By the migration era, Woden was one of the most important deities. He's identified by the Romans sometimes as Mars, but more often as Mercury. War captives are slaughtered to him. Human sacrifices practiced in bogs. Now, what's interesting is that what you see here is a picture of a bracteate. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Basically, it's a medallion based on Roman models. The medallions were like status symbols worn by upper-class Germanic tribes at the time. There's a couple of different types. The type C bracteates always has a quadruped, a horse with a human figure on top. this figure has been identified as Woden. Now that theory has its detractors, but the conventional archaeological theory is that this is Woden on medallion. He is the patron god of the aristocracy. Runes were developed sometime in the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, seemingly under a centralized authority because the early runes are very tight-knit. There's very little variation of the runes, implying a strong cult. And that cult presumably was under Woden. I mean, there's no definite evidence, but the later Viking poetry certainly proclaims him as the god of runes, hanging on the world tree. And if he's the god of magic and poetry, then the runes must have developed under his patronage. What's interesting is that these type C bracteates have an interesting bind rune on them. A lot of them have a Gable Ansu's bind rune, which is usually interpreted as Odin gives you luck, good luck. Ansu's is definitely Odin's rune, for what it's worth. Now, there's a debate as to how much the Anglo-Saxon Woden is similar to the Scandinavian Odin. If you strip away all of Norse poetry, if all you have are the Anglo-Saxon sources, he's left with the royal ancestor, the god of 7 of the 8 royal houses, and a god mentioned in the 9 herbs term as a magic user. That's it. There are some Anglo-Saxon heathens who do not accept the stories of Valhalla, the Einherjar, and all that. They see Odin as a god of kingship and magic, basically. And for what's worth, I belong to an Anglo-Saxon kindred, and we still suss that out ourselves. Is Woden Odin or something different? It's an ongoing debate. So by the late Viking era, Norse poetry declares him the chieftain of the Aesir. The closest thing to a central theme uniting Norse poetry is the idea of Ragnarok. Everything Odin does is for the fated battle of Ragnarok against Surt and his fire giants. Everything Odin does, while often treacherous, while often beguiling, is for a higher purpose. The means justify the ends in his case. Okay, because he was the patron of aristocrats and poets, he has more lore than any other deity. It is doubtful how much influence he held outside the aristocrats and skalds. And, in certain places of Scandinavia, other deities are more important. Freyr in Sweden, Thor in Iceland. So he is not the god of a common individual, despite his prevalence in poetry. And then if you attended my first lecture, we talked about the Havamal. It's theorized that the Havamal was written by aristocrats who lost their estates when Harald Finehair took over, and that these wandering, homeless cultists of Odin are the ones who wrote the Havamal. Because if you read the first 3 sections of the Havamal, the advice is kind of cynical and practical and down to earth. It really describes people wandering in hard times. All right, now wrapping up on the cult. In 878, Ubi, the Viking, uses a raven banner to lead the Viking armies in the Wills. You can see here a tapestry with a Viking soldier, and at the end of his lance is a raven banner. The movement of the flag predicted battle. If it was lifeless, it meant defeat. If it fluttered in the wind, it meant victory. For what it's worth, Ubi and his men are eventually killed, and the raven banner is captured. Around 1200, a Torf Einar avenges his father's murder. He blood eagles his victim. The blood eagle, I'm sure everyone knows. You go in the back, you pull out the ribs, the lungs. Gruesome way to die. The victim is dedicated to Odin as the god of human sacrifice. Now, this is very interesting, this last piece. Around 860, Pippin II, king of Aquitaine, joined the Viking cause. He supposedly renounced Christianity and worshipped Odin, which would make him the first heathen convert in history that I know of. Now, whether that actually happened or whether that was propaganda placed against him by his other opponents, I don't know. That's interesting. Any questions, concerns, or comments on the evolution of the cult?
Minor question. This is James.
Yes, sir.
The King of Aquitaine. It may be a stretch. Is that any relation to Eleanor of Aquitaine from Henry V?
Well, Aquitaine's somewhere near France or in France. What was that?
Aquitaine was a kingdom that separated from the south of France,
Okay.
which is most known for being where most of the troubadours hailed from, but it's a major part of French history in that sense. Whether or not there was a direct relation, I don't know. Eleanor of Aquitaine was Richard I's mother, so it's possible, but they're separated by a couple hundred years at least. So wouldn't be surprised if the throne had passed to a different family at some point in that interim period.
Okay, I correct myself. It's not Henry V. The movie was The Lion in Winter. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. That was King Richard. And like I said, that was like, I want to say around 1200 was Eleanor of Aquitaine. The troubadour period was the 12 and 1300s. So what happened in 300 to 400 years of passing of thrones, I wouldn't even want to guess without having a history book in front of me.
Okay.
But yeah, that is the same kingdom, and it is a kingdom in the south of France.
Okay.
Probably technically a province of France, but.
Thank you.
You'll have to forgive me. My medieval knowledge is limited. I find particularly boring Arab history because of all the Christianity, but that's just me. So thank you for speaking up. Any other questions or concerns?
I have a comment.
Yes.
On the tier thing. Last week, my wife and I went to Tissø on Sealand in Denmark. There was found a very big Viking settlement with a chieftain at the lake of Tyr, and in the lake was found sacrifices. One of them was a very large golden ring. So that gives a connection a little bit of the golden ring and Odin. So.
Was there something on the golden ring that marked it as Odin's?
No, but he had the Draupnir ring. It could
be. The Draupnir.
And at least the name Tyr seems to be, in a place where the chieftain of that town, part of the country, were living.
They're finding stuff all the time in archaeology, and half the time they attribute it to Odin, whether it should be or not. But it's the more relics we have, the more data we can go through. So
exactly. We get really many relics right now because the what's called the metal detectors really find a lot.
Interesting.
And the state pay them quite handsomely for the things they find, so everything gets to the museums.
Yeah, I wish that would happen here in New York. Perry, New York, is not going to happen here. All the Viking area. Any other comments, concerns? All right, so now we leave heathen times per se. We're into an area where everything is Christianized, more or less. You'll have to forgive me, the dog on the couch is sneezing. A little distracting. Okay, anyway, so the heathen deities are equated to demons and evil spirits by the church. Odin in particular becomes conflated with Satan. There was one medieval rune carver that calls upon him as the greatest of demons. Odin, greatest of demons. Now, in the Galdra book, a medieval Icelandic grimoire, which used stylized runes, Galdurstafur, Odin is invoked alongside Satan. So, for instance, here's a text from Spell 43. Help in this, all ye gods, Thor, Odin, Frigg, Freya, Satan, Beelzebub, and all those gods and goddesses that dwell in Valhalla. In thy mightiest name, Odin. Magicians back then were a lot like magicians, or should I say high magicians today. Spiritual power was a spiritual power. You called on him or her to gain power for your spell. They really didn't care if it was a coherent system of magic. They really didn't care if it was moral or not. It was all about power and efficacy of the spell. The point here is Odin is invoked alongside Satan and Beelzebub and all the other angels of hell. Medieval Scandinavia imposes a death sentence for so-called black magic. Odin, as equated somewhat with the devil, is seen as patron of the art. Now, there are law codes that exist. In 1485, a man who is called Odin's man, is accused of having served Odin for 7 years and of robbing a church, and he is sentenced to die. So is this the church making something up, or is there a cult of Odin that still exists, 400 years after conversion? In 1492, there is a man named Erik Clausen. He turned to Odin for promises of money. It was said that on 9 successive Thursday nights, he walked counterclockwise around a churchyard and renounced God. Now, in some magical systems, walking counterclockwise is the banishing motion, so banishing God, I suppose. In any case, he is sentenced to torture and death. So apparently there are apostates hanging out 400 years after conversion, if you are to believe the church and its legal codes. In folklore, we have the wild hunt, spectral dead shooting through the sky, black horses, black dogs, especially prevalent at Yule time. If you're walking the crossroads at Yule time and the wild hunt descends upon you, you can die, or you can get swept up in the wild hunt, or you can go mad. Although there are there's folkloric evidence that it was also a blessing. In other words, if they ruled over your crops were blessed and such. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, has a dream. He encounters a strange huntsman in the woods. He hears a blood-curdling shriek from nearby lunatic asylum. The huntsman's wild and uncanny. They converse a little bit, and then the huntsman issues a loud whistle. Nietzsche falls unconscious, and later he wakes in the next town over. Now, Nietzsche, because of his classical heritage, he identified the huntsman as Dionysus. But writing later, Carl Jung says that the huntsman that Nietzsche encountered in his dream was Wotan, Odin, or his archetype at least. And in his famous essay on Wotan, he also claims that the archetype of Wotan had seized Germany, was preparing it for war, and more or less blames it for National Socialism. So, when we have a problem in Heathen today with Nazis, I don't know how they make the connection to Nazism, because Hitler wasn't a fan of the heathen religion. But I think a lot of them are into Jungian studies. They read this study, this essay by Jung, where he basically blamed Woden for National Socialism. I think that's one of their intellectual connections for racialism in heathenry. Now, Jung also alludes to German youth movements, von der Vogel, of the late, 1896 to 1933. Apparently, these were back to nature nationalistic affairs. Some are quasi-pagan. Apparently, there were sheep sacrifices at the solstice to Woden. I can't find any more information about this. I think it's fascinating. Most of it's probably in German. So if you can read German, read it and let me know. Unfortunately, I can't read German at that level.
Most of the Wonderful went into Hitler Youth afterwards.
Yeah.
Some of the Hitler Youth group started as Wonderful groups, and then a small part of the movement stayed outside, but you couldn't exist after 1933. Where all other youth groups were illegal. The only legal youth group in Germany, other than Hitlerjugend, after that was the Danish Scouts of Southern Jutland, because they were accepted as a national organization for Danes living down there. So in Southern Jutland they didn't have to become Nazi Hitler Youth. They could go into the Danish Scout movement there instead.
This is James. Wasn't it, I believe, Joseph Goebbels that was primarily the one into the occult, so to speak?
It was Himmler and some of his cronies.
Himmler,
actually.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. There's this book called The Secret King by Stephen Flowers, who details one of Himmler's occult advisors. It's very strange and fascinating at the same time. It's an interesting read.
Because Hitler himself was pretty much a straight arrow, I mean, so to speak. I mean, he was a vegetarian. He watched what he ate, and he was, from what I read.
He was a Catholic, and he's on record as saying that Himmler is just nuts and atavistic, and that this German heathenry cannot advance the racial agenda that he wanted. So he disagreed with Himmler on that.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, and then more into the modern era, I'm sure everyone knows Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, the image of Woden, a wandering and duplicitous magician in a broad-brimmed hat, is the basis of the character Gandalf. All right, so that's post-Heathen times. Any questions, concerns, or comments before we continue? All right. So the modern era. I begin the modern era with the left-hand path of magic. The point of magic under this paradigm is to elevate one's consciousness. In fact, for some people, it's to become a god, so to speak. Gods are metaphors for nature and psychology. So most left-hand magicians are actually Satanists. However, there are areas where Odin is preferred. So Odin is the archetype of the supreme magician who sacrificed himself to acquire power and knowledge. Now, if you're, I used to be a member of the Rune Guild, and if you go into the Rune Guild and get its readings, you'll see that this Odin as archetype is more or less the official theology of the Rune Guild. In order to learn magic, you become like Odin. You're inspired by Odin. He's not really a god to worship. He's a god to emulate. So, and they have a saying: if you want to be wise, don't seek Odin. Seek what Odin sought. Aside from the Rune Guild, there are so-called chaos magicians who work with runes. Runes are symbols that work with the unconscious mind. You don't necessarily need to believe in Odin as a god in order to use runes. Okay. All right, so that's all I have to say about that particular strain of the occult, that particular strain of magic. I want to spend the rest of the time talking about heathenry and Norse paganism. So in the surviving lore, Odin was the god most likely to interact with people. In modern times, Odin seems the god most widely mentioned in recruiting people or otherwise getting their attention. Usually it's a contest between Odin and Loki as to who recruits more. There are many who would say if Odin desires your service, he will hound you until you swear fealty. If he wants you, you really don't have a choice. You can't say no, or at least after a point, you can't say no. So that being said, what are some types of people he likes to recruit? And again, this is based on my experience with the heathen community and the pagan community and the druid community. And it corroborates with a lot of other people's experience. Magic users. Odin presided over runes, Galdr, and Seath. In modern times, he calls ceremonial magicians, witches, seers, seeresses, shamans, anyone who identifies with the esoteric, with magic. He tends to call those people. And in fact, in more New Age circles, that's his principal draw. He's a quote-unquote shamanistic deity. The artistic. Odin was the god of wood, of inspiration, and thus the patron of skaldic poets. Now, in modern times, he calls poets and writers, but also I know fine artists, craftsmen, singers, writers of all types. If you have a creative frenzy, you can honor Odin. Knowledge seekers. Heathenry in general tends to be a little bit above the average population as far as intelligence, as far as reading knowledge, and you don't necessarily have to be sworn to Odin to get those credentials. But What distinguishes Odinic knowledge is the thirst for knowledge, the insatiable lust to know more, to discover, to sacrifice more. It's like a compulsion. So a lot of people who have that compulsion end up with Odin as a patron. Now, it's important to note that wisdom is found not only in the ivory tower of books, but on the streets, in the back alleys. So whether you're an ivory tower academic or whether you're the street smart swindler, there are different types of knowledge, and Odin combines both. Warriors in in certain areas of heathenry and Asatru, there's a primacy on Viking warrior values. Odin is known mostly as a war god, leader of the Einherjar, patron of the Berserk. And finally, he was a god of aristocrats. He says the chieftain of the gods. A lot of Odinic people that I know, sworn to Odin, are not content to be part of the rabble. They are not content to be part of the background. They seek leadership. They seek power, whether they admit it or not. Most Odinic people have a bite to their personality, even if it's not apparent. If you get to know them, they have a strong personality and they bite back. So with that in mind, this is my personal interpretation, okay? There's two broad categories. Odin is the god of the hall versus the god of liminal places. So the inner yard, symbolized by the hall. The hall is peace, order, happiness, justice, prosperity, warmth, and light. Odin presides over the lords, the warriors, the advisors, the poets, the artists, all those who contribute to a civilized life within the hall. But he's also the god of the outer yard, okay? He's the god of crossroads and swamps and bogs and dark roads where disorder and violence and darkness prevail, where spirits roam, okay? So he's the god of both. Now, just let me talk a little bit more and then I'll get to your experiences. Here's how I view it. And again, this is completely subjective, completely my own, not to impress upon anyone else. I entered heathenry largely due to the lore of Odin and the runes. That's what drew me to this religion. After a period of soul searching where I would say Odin actually hounded me, I publicly oathed him. You can't say no for long if he really wants you. In my Anglo-Saxon kindred, I honor the Allfather as Woden. In my private shrine, I honor him as Odin or Odin. To me, he's a god of magic, poetry, wisdom, and sacrifice. I really do not see him as a war god. To me, he's a god of magic and sacrifice, and those bleed over into war. Okay, that's just my interpretation. Now, that being said, I turn the forum over to everyone else here. Do you work with Odin? What does he mean to you? What are your experiences with him? So feel free to comment. I want to hear. Anyone?
I guess from the military aspect, he would be closely to military intelligence, wouldn't he?
Well, from my perspective, he would be a specialized warrior, like an intelligence agent, or he would be an officer, like a general. He wouldn't be a god of the common grunt.
But he seeks knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And so an intelligence agent would be very well to have Odin as a patron, I think. So yeah, that is a very valid point. I would say him as a god of distinguished officers and distinguished subgroups like intelligence, rather than the average soldier who slugs it through a foxhole. Again, he's not the god of common people, but god of intelligence agencies, definitely.
Thank you.
Yes. Anyone else? Anyone actively honor Odin as their patron?
Yeah. With regard to his military aspect, though, I think the best description I've heard, and I can't remember where exactly now, is that in some ways Odin is a god of death and fortune, And his role in battle isn't to go and kill things, but he is the patron of the fates that cause people to get killed or not in battle in a kind of a semi-random way. One of the magics associated with Odin is, of course, the shirt that turns away weapons, and he's sort of the god of the luck that happens to people in mass combat, is the way I've seen it described, which I think fits in. This analysis fits in with his first function sovereign characteristics. If you're following that line of thought.
Do you take seriously the theory that he is the god of the Einherjar, and he does what he does to reap souls for the Einherjar for Ragnarok?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I also think that it's also kind of his nature to sort of draw on followers towards excellence and then destroy them. I think I talked about that a little bit last time.
Yeah, you talked about the Odinic current where you're built up, and then at the end you have this collapse or this catastrophe that knocks you destroyed. But then there might be a resurrection after that at some point. Yeah. Well, I've been following Odin for years. I don't know how much he's built me up. He's more like a taskmaster that demands you to do things. So I've never felt this destruction that comes, but then I don't feel that I've been built up yet either.
Yeah. Well, not everybody gets the full pattern, I don't think, especially in real life. But that does seem to be the mythological and literary pattern. I mean, one of the sources you didn't mention was the Eriksmal, which is basically a poem eulogizing Eric Bloodaxe. And at one point it asks, why did Eric lose his final battle if he was the more worthy combatant? And the answer is that Odin needed him to help defend against the wolf. What is it? The gray wolf gapes ever at the halls of the gods, or drools at it, or stares at it, or something. The word is a little ambiguous. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Something like that. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I got connected to Odin when I first got into learning more about organized paganry, I guess. And I was part of the Irish community, so I was working a lot with the Irish gods, and then kind of Breege kind of grabbed me by the metaphysical hand, or the spiritual hand, and said, come on, you're going with me. And I'm like, okay, what's going on, in a meditation thing. And next thing you know, I was standing for Odin and Freya, and kind of got this little push on the back and said, here, he's yours now. We've taken care of him for you. And so I've been working with Freya and Odin primarily in the magic and rune and that aspect of things. So I've always more seen Odin in that way rather than the whole warrior aspect of it. So kind of like what you said earlier, Jeremy. And that's kind of how he means to me, is I connect with him more along those lines rather than the chest thumping type stuff. And I'm just now starting to expand my knowledge and gain some more knowledge. So I'm gonna try working with him in that aspect of it as well, a lot more.
I would say most of my associates who are connected to Odin are in for the magic and the artistry rather than the military aspect. Although in fairness, I don't hang around military circles, so I could have a skewed perspective. Just throwing that out there.
I would say I definitely would. For me, Odin represents wisdom and, shamanistic and esoteric practices. Like you said, sacrifice for sure. I have been in circles of, you know, U.S. Special Forces people who like the ideas of Valhalla and somebody organizing all the elite people who die in battle to celebrate their efforts and to continue them into eternity. And I think Odin gets attached to that more because his name is attached to Valhalla rather than anything having to actually do with Odin himself.
Yeah.
But for me, it's definitely, you know, his ability to travel to different worlds and to work with secret knowledge, and to kind of be, you know, more concerned with the overall big picture, playing chess, rather than being the pawn on the board. Definitely is what I relate to most about him, and that's how I view him for myself.
The master strategist rather than the pawn. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. As a side note, if you read the prose Edda and you read the section on Valhalla, it gives you the number of doors in Valhalla and the number of people that can enter each exit each door. And if you take those two numbers and multiply them, you come up with something like just under half a million people or something like that. In any case, I'm wondering if there is a Valhalla, are all the slots already filled? Because, you know, looking back 1,000 years, a lot of people have died. So is he still actively recruiting? Who knows?
Or maybe some of the older ones fade and don't become active or just become a memory.
It's possible. New blood for Valhalla. Get the old timers in. Put them on a pension.
Yeah, to update themselves for the more modern Ragnarok or whatever like that. Is it strange to have never had any interaction with him?
No. I mean, I don't know you very well, but he doesn't appear to everyone. He doesn't demand everyone, that's for sure.
I was just wondering because I've never had any interaction with him. Seems like everyone else has, but
I would say that, you know, in my kindred, half the members really don't want anything to do with him outside of a runic omen. We do, because you know, they're farmers, or they're simple everyday people who have no use for magic, have no use for battle. They just want to live a quiet life. So if that's the type of person that you are, I don't think you're really going to attract Odin at all, to be honest with you.
That's me.
And I think it's okay. Some people, a lot of people I come across with that think, or it seems like they think that they have to be in touch with Odin because he's the All-Father and he's kind of popular. There's a lot of folks know, but it's like, if he doesn't reach out to you or interact with you, I mean, there's a lot of other gods and goddesses that are interacting with people and that we can be devoted with. So it doesn't mean that we're not be on notice or not doing great things because someone's not connected to Odin. It just means that, hey, one is really doing a lot of stuff with some of the other gods or goddesses, and that's awesome.
yeah, no, I don't feel a lack in my life.
I wasn't implying that. I just think some people.
Oh yeah.
I talk to think that.
And I'm not trying to like get his attention or anything like that. It just seemed like it was more like it seems like everyone I know has had some sort of interaction with him, even in a passing sort of way, and I never really had it because he's not the god in my life. I have more connection with other gods.
May I suggest that you may have? Who said it was direct contact?
True, but
and the other point is Master Disguise. So we're dealing with Master Disguise who may have indirect contact with you.
True, but I mean, so I'm a creative writing. I was a major in English, and my emphasis was creative writing. And even then, even like when I was writing short stories and poetry like on a daily basis, and pouring all of my literary creative soul into my work, I still didn't feel any sort of, I mean, I wasn't heathen back then, but I still didn't feel as if I was being divinely blessed in any sort of way. I do know that there was another god in my life that has been around for a lot longer, even pre-heathen, but it wasn't Odin.
I have a question in general. I'm wondering, wouldn't Odin also have considered checking with the Norns, since they would be aware of the people's destinies on who would be ultimately worthy to stand in the end with Ragnarok, rather than testing each person daily? It just, I would think he would have more direct access. Well, that's actually a bad way of saying it. He would have more efficient ways of finding out who would be worth his attention by going to the Norns.
I guess it depends on how seriously you take all that poetry. I mean, is it a literal thing? I don't know how much I take it. But to answer your question, I can give you this. Maybe the Norns are responsible for the very, very broad outline of reality, of faith, whereas Odin is more detailed as far as that stuff. One possible solution to that.
Okay.
I will say personally that and this is, major UPG, but I do feel like he does commune with the Norns on a regular basis, and that does influence his choices on how he wants to mess with people's orlog and weird. So that's just my 2 cents there.
I've always seen, sorry, this is going to drive me crazy having it come out of 2 things. I've always seen Odin as the master strategist, like whether that's in how he's recruiting for Ragnarok, whether that's in, so like Jeremy, I also am oath to Odin, and I very strongly feel and see him in this mastermind of resurgence of paganism in general. Whether you want to say that Ragnarok is a final battle or is allegorical for something of that nature, and the rebuilding of the new world, what have you, which is how I tend to see it personally. But I tend to see him as the mastermind, and that he'll do whatever it takes to get to his final goal. He'll everything to him, all of us to him are pawns. Everything is a pawn. Everything is expendable. You fulfill the task that you're given, or you have no worth. It's one or the other. And so I do kind of see him as the grand strategist who is pulling the strings to try to bring out the outcome that he desires. And so, like you said, Michael, I see him working with the Norns to see who is going to best fulfill the role that he needs to have happen in order to see X, whatever X may be. Not that I would in any way think that I know what his end game is, but I do see him as playing towards a major end game and working with the Norns to put the best people in place in order to have what he wants to have happen.
Any other comments, concerns, questions, gripes, philosophy?
I used to be an Odin's man. eons ago, and I must admit I felt his presence because I'm still in the SCA, and back then I found myself in the Pensive Wars screaming his name as I swing into battle with a sword and shield. So I understand what it's like. They have the eyebrows grow together, the knuckles start extending to the ground.
Gunnar, I would want to say one other thing, and that is, I want to credit John Maynor with this, but I could be wrong in making that credit. But from when I first came to Heathenry years ago now, I believe John was the one who made a post on the Troth email list. And he said something along the lines of, as pagans, we tend to pigeonhole the gods into this god of this, the god of that, the god of winter, the god of war, the god of learning, the goddess of love, what have you. And instead, we should maybe look at they all oversee all aspects of our life. They just do it in different ways. So if you're a devotee of Thor and you're going into battle, he might protect you by strengthening your arm. And Odin might protect you by making you go a little crazy and protecting your mental capacity that way. And Freya might protect you, in a different way. And Frigga might protect you by protecting you with her magic, what have you. They all have their own ways of interacting with their people. And so just because we have spent so much time today talking about him as a god of war and whether or not he is a god of war, I think it's good to reiterate that all of our gods are multidimensional beings that are capable of having a significant role in every aspect of our life. And it's just that they might go about doing that a little bit differently depending upon their area of interest and how they interact with their followers.
If I may, going back, earlier you stated, or it was mentioned that Tyr usurped Woden as the head. I was just wondering, was that an actual usurp? If it happened, wasn't it a handoff, so to speak, so that Tyr could do what he wanted to do?
Well, the theory was that the original head of the pantheon, to the extent that there was a pantheon, was Tyr, or Tyr as he was known, and it was Odin who usurped his place. And again, this is based on linguistic analysis in the European philology, and the fact that Tyr's name means God and is related to Zeus, Jupiter, or in the European shining sky father. So it wasn't Tyr that usurped Odin; it was Odin that usurped Tyr.
I'm sorry, you're correct. But I'm wondering, could have been voluntary? Could have Tyr decided, for whatever reasons, to let Odin take that position?
Well, there's a theory, like in the Celtic tradition, there's a god called Nuada, I believe, who loses his arm, and because kings in the Celtic tradition have to be free of physical blemishes, he had to step down as a king and let somebody else lead. So there is a theory in modern UPG circles that Tyr was the chief god. When he lost his hand to the wolf, that's when Odin had to take over, because he was no longer perfect. He was no longer capable of leading gods into battle. So that's one theory. Whether or not I believe that, I really can't tell you. But I really don't know. I really don't know if I actually believe that Tyr was the original chief god. Again, it's all based on theory and linguistic analysis. I don't think there's any hard evidence to it.
Okay.
It doesn't fit well either, because Odin lost his eye, so he also had a blemish.
True.
The other thing to take into account with that is that our pantheon is very odd linguistically, in that we have multiple gods whose names can linguistically be traced to the European Sky Father or the Indo-European Sky Father, right? Because you could say the same about Thor. Thor is also linguistically traced to Zeus Father.
And the other thing to consider is that every little tribe might have its own distinct pantheon where such and such a god may be the head god, not necessarily Odin or Tyr. So.
Jeremy, I just wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate everybody being here, but I'm gonna have to jump off.
I think we're pretty much done at this point anyway, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a pleasure having you, sir.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for welcoming us.
All right. Well, I guess at this point we're concluded. Thank you all, and you can watch the video on YouTube if you missed the beginning.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.